All right, I'm going to call the meeting to order. This is Friday, May 3rd, 2024. It is 9 a.m. We are in City Hall Council Chambers. This is a Common Council meeting, but it is Common Council orientation. Next item on the agenda is the Pledge of Allegiance. Please rise.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Next, we have a presentation from the outside council, Bob Burns from Green Bay. Bob, if you want to come up to the podium. During the meeting, we do have refreshments over there, coffee, donuts. We'll go for a little while. We'll probably take a break and come back in. So,
thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with you. Beautiful day. Nice start to the weekend, we hope, for everyone. And I did want to say I appreciated on the agenda being listed as outside counsel with, of course, Tom Hayden being your in-house counsel. Sometimes I get referred to as outhouse counsel, and this is much more pleasant. So thank you. It is a pleasure to work with the city on special matters that come up, and from time to time get involved in those situations that may warrant the work of outside counsel. But today we have the ability to spend a little time talking about some of the general roles and responsibilities that city council members have, that as alderpersons, what your role is, what the some of the obligations and some of the issues that we want to highlight. So the items that were on the agenda are those that I was asked to focus on this morning, and we'll work through those, and certainly want to be able to allow some time for questions as well that you might have on any of this. But we'll start out talking about expectations, meeting etiquette, then the role of an alderperson, focus for a while on workplace harassment, discrimination laws, and harassment reporting and so forth that are some important obligations that we all have in whatever role we have with the city. Talk about open meeting laws and walking quorums, which are becoming more of an issue, of course, as the electronic communication availabilities are out there as they are, and then cell phone use during meetings, and try to, as I said, leave some time for questions too. So, talking on expectations and meeting etiquette, some of the a lot of these points most of you know or practice already. For newer alders, it's an opportunity to kind of get on the same page with everyone else. But we want to encourage you to review your agenda and prepare for meetings. Just coming to the meeting without any preparation doesn't serve you well, doesn't serve the city well, obviously, because you want to be able to go through the agenda, look at your packet, go over what is coming up, think about those things, and not necessarily make your mind up. In fact, preferably not really make your mind up on things until you've heard the discussion on the items, but at least be ready to have some questions or know what the topics at hand are going to be, and which topics may be more controversial than others, and sort of think those through a little bit more. Certainly listening to your constituents is part of that process and preparation, but at the same time, we don't decide everything just based on referendum, if you will. It's more or less a part of the learning and preparation process, but you want to enter the meeting with an open mind and be able to hear the discussion, hear the pros and cons of whatever's on the table, and then make your mind up, make your decision at that point. So that also involves, listening to all opinions on the topic. Don't disregard an opinion just because it doesn't match up with how you're thinking about the issue. Maybe it'll, maybe change your thoughts on it to some extent. And of course, asking questions is fundamentally important in the legislative process like that, and in the discretion you're exercising on any given topic. And also carefully consider the recommendations of staff, because these are the folks that are, in the front line every day, dealing with the issues, dealing with whatever the topic might be on the agenda, and so they have experience with those things, and the experience is valuable. Their training background is valuable, and so giving due respect, due consideration to their recommendations is important. That doesn't mean you're a rubber stamp. That doesn't mean you just, well, this is what staff recommends, this is what we better do. It's not. That's not the thought process. But, understanding that there is expertise that they bring to the table in whatever area you're talking about, and taking that into account can be very helpful. Important piece, of course, is following the agenda and staying on topic, because when you stray off the agenda, it's not only unproductive for the meeting, but it could also be illegal from a meeting notice standpoint, and we'll talk more about that later. But staying on topic is just helpful to everyone, and so the way I put it is the next bullet point there, which is respect the gavel. If there's a point of order, you want to kind of rein it in and get back on topic, or if people are talking over one another or something like that, that doesn't help a whole lot. It's one of the things when you listen to some of the sports talk shows or news talk shows, that people start getting going and talking over one another. You can't understand anything that's being said, and that's true in the meeting context as well. And I think a big topic these days, all over the country, really, is civility, and it's an issue in the courtrooms too. Judges are seeing more and more situations where they have to clamp down on the behavior of people in the courtroom, and sometimes we see some of that in meetings as well. It's important to just behave in a civil manner and respect the person you're talking to, even if you strongly disagree with them, and then also have the ability to respond in a respectful way without getting into arguments or unpleasantries, if you will, when you disagree. A disagreement is a natural thing. We all can disagree on anything and everything every day with those we engage with, but it's a matter of just doing it in a respectful and civil manner. Another meeting component, of course, is occasionally you have to go into closed session and executive session, or however you want to label it, and it's important to respect the confidentiality of those, because as we'll talk about a little later, the reason there has to be a specific reason why you are in closed session, and that confidentiality is important, and so we all have, anyone participating in that closed session has an obligation to maintain that confidentiality and not discuss what was said by whom and that kind of thing outside the closed session. So that's sort of the overview of meetings, meeting etiquette, if you will. Any questions or comments on that? Okay. Next is the role of an alderperson. Well, surprise, surprise, believe it or not, you're an elected official. So that's what the election is for, to elect you. That means you're representing the interests, obviously, of your constituents, but you're also obligated to act in the best interests of the city. And so you have sort of two layers of responsibility there, the direct and the broad best interests. You are considered what's referred to in the statutes as a local public office holder under the public records law. And this category is not just elected officials. It can include like a department head, just such as the police chief, the fire chief, school superintendent. A lot of other employed positions can also be local public office holders under the public records law. And what that means is you're considered the custodian of your records that relate to the city's business, and so you would have an obligation to produce those unless some exception would apply if you were to get a public records request. You could also be the subject of a public records request as a local public office holder, where a member of the public or media or whomever may make a request for records the city has pertaining to you or to the communications that you have with others on city business. And so unless, again, some of the exceptions would apply, then the records would be produced by the city's custodian of the records if the request is made to the city from that standpoint. So there are responsibilities there, and the public records law is a important feature of Wisconsin's open government, just as the open meetings law is. And so it's important to take those responsibilities seriously, and keep in mind too, it's not where you have the record, it's what's the substance of the records. Sometimes I get the question, well, this was on my personal cell phone, a text about some issue. Well, it doesn't matter if it's on your personal phone. If it deals with city business, it's going to be a public record, and it's more likely than not a disclosable public record, unless it fits an exception such as relating to a pending personnel issue or something like that, where we would have an argument that it should not be turned over, or has some citizens personally, social security number on it or something. There'd be exceptions or things you would redact from the document. But by and large, information that pertains to city business is going to be considered a public record. And it's always two questions. Sometimes we confuse that too. Somebody say, well, is that a public record? The answer is many times yes. But then the second question that has to be answered is it subject to disclosure? Because sometimes you have to do the balancing test, or there may be some statutory exception that applies. So it's always two questions. Is it a public record, and is it disclosable?
Bob, on that, like, if somebody's taking notes during the meeting, are those subject to this? If somebody would say what was...
Generally, notes would not be if they're for the personal use of the note taker and not disseminated to anyone else.
Okay.
In the definition of public records, there's an exception for notes that are personal notes for the purpose of the note taker,
Okay.
and not disseminated. But if they're published or given out, or otherwise, then it would be.
Okay.
The next area is the legislative role that you have as the city council is to do a lot of different things, establish policies for the city, adopt, repeal, revise ordinances, resolutions, you adopt a budget, you act on personnel matters, you make appointments of people to various bodies or offices. So there's a lot of authority, a lot of responsibility and functions that you are obligated to perform. But a key thing to keep in mind is that authority and power is of the council acting as a body, not an individual authority or power that you have. Individual alderpersons do not have power other than your power of your vote on the council. An exception might be if you are delegated or authorized by a committee or the council to do a particular function. You're going to look into this particular matter, or you're going to follow up with someone on a particular issue, and the committee delegates or designates you to do that, or the council designates you to do that. Then you would have the authority within that delegation. And sometimes, I had a different city that I worked with years ago. There was an alderperson who would, if the public works crew was in his ward, he would go and tell those workers what to do, and because I'm the alderman for this ward, and I'm gonna, I want you to do it this way or that way, and so we ended up having a little chat about how that all worked, and it all it all worked out fine. His intentions were good, but he felt that he had some sort of authority that he didn't have as an individual, and it's just worth keeping that in mind. You act as a council, and that's where the authority comes from. Another important area is that of the ethical obligations that you have, and we could spend a whole morning seminar on this, and I've done those in the past, but you also have a great city attorney who can answer your questions as they may come up in this area. If you have practical situations that you have a question mark about, but generally speaking, your primary ethical obligations are the three areas that are listed in the outline here. You've got the state ethics code, which primarily it deals with using your office for financial gain. This is where somebody offering you something to vote a certain way, or excessive whining and dining you on a particular issue, those kinds of things. That falls under the ethics code, and there's various provisions that can apply there. The next area is that of a conflict of interest, which is actually a criminal statute, the 946.13, and that has a couple different dimensions, which involve either having the authority to take action or taking action with regard to a private, in your private capacity, that you're negotiating or bidding to enter into a contract with the city from which you get a personal pecuniary interest, a pecuniary financial type of interest. So this is what prevents you from trying to negotiate, if you own a electrical business, trying to negotiate to do a major electrical project for the city. There is a $15,000 exclusion in that statute. So, if it's putting in a few light sockets, which I don't think yet comes to $15,000 these days, you're gonna be okay. But generally speaking, I think most public officials just try to stay as clear of that as possible. The other aspect of that statute is participating in a municipal contract, voting on it if it's not if it could result in personal gain or having a financial interest in it. Those provisions can get complicated, and so that's where I say if you've got anything on the radar screen that you're concerned about, it's worth talking with your legal counsel on that, just to make sure you're okay. Another part of the personal contract, in contract in your private capacity provision to keep in mind is that just recusing yourself from the vote or abstaining is not good enough, because that part of the law deals with whether you have the authority in your role in the city to act on it, even if you would recuse or abstain from the vote. Then the last area is that of incompatibility of office, which usually comes up in the context of employment. That incompatibility doctrine is not a statute, but it's been developed by case law. So there's cases and Attorney General's opinions out there on it that talk about the incompatibility of being both an employee and someone in a position such as yours. Same thing, that's why a teacher in a school district can't be on the school board. You, as alderpersons, you can also be employees of the city because there's an incompatibility between the law refers to it as not serving two masters at the same time. You can't, be serving the public as an elected official and being subject to a supervisor in the city employment setting. So that's usually where it comes up, is either if a alderperson wants to become a city employee, then they've got to give up the alder role. If an employee wants to run for city council, they win, they're going to have to quit their job. So it can work in either direction. But that's incompatibility of office, and it's been a very very established doctrine for a long time, even though it's not in the statutes itself. But sometimes it gets confused with conflict of interest. It's actually a separate issue. So, any questions on that?
Yeah. How does that apply to, I'm on city council, now I can be on the school board and the county board. We're approving funds for each other. How does that?
Well, for one, there's no private pecuniary interest that you have. So that rules out the really bad stuff. The other is that when it comes to various offices, there are some offices in the law where they view the offices as the two governmental positions as being incompatible. I'm trying to think of an example right offhand, but what I think in the city council is that there isn't a direct oversight. A school district is a separate municipal entity. City's a separate municipal entity. They don't control each other. They have relations with each other, and so there may be times that you would recuse yourself in some instances, perhaps, but it's not a conflict in that sense. Okay, well then, why don't we turn to the workplace harassment issue? And it's important to recognize that as a city official, anyone in a position of authority, supervisory, management, elected officials, anybody in those kinds of positions has a responsibility to do what they can to maintain an environment in the city of employment that would be free of unlawful discrimination or harassment. That brings into play the protected classes that we have under federal or state law. You see the first listing is the Wisconsin Fair Employment Act, which actually has more protected classifications than federal law does. For example, marital status is protected under Wisconsin law. Arrest record, conviction record is protected under Wisconsin law, not federally. There's a couple of other ones: non-use of lawful products off the employer's premises during non-working hours. That's a protected class in Wisconsin. Anybody can think of who lobbied that into play way back when? The beer industry. So you couldn't discipline or fire somebody because they drank liquor, and the brewers back in the days when the breweries were big in Wisconsin lobbied that in. So there's a variety of those areas that Wisconsin law protects, and obviously things can get complicated in that regard. And Wisconsin had sex discrimination protection and disability protection long before they came into federal law. So Wisconsin's had a long history of protecting these areas. We also have the federal laws listed here, the primary ones that deal with Title VII, which is the one that involves race, color, religion, national origin, and sex. And then there was the Pregnancy Discrimination Act of 1978. We just had last year passed the Pregnant Worker Fairness Act, which added accommodation protection for pregnant employees. The Age Discrimination in Employment Act protects individuals 40 or over. That's a one-way statute. A couple times I've had a case where a very young employee wanted to allege age discrimination because they felt they weren't being treated as well as some of the older employees, but the law doesn't work that way. The law just protects if you're over 40. You can't be discriminated against in favor of someone younger. We've also got the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990, the Pregnant Workers Act I mentioned. What it boils down to, and what I guess, again, this is a topic we could do a whole day seminar on, all the discrimination laws and sexual harassment and so forth. But and sometimes we only think of, when we hear the word harassment, we think of sexual harassment, but actually harassment on the basis of any of the protected classes, age, national origin, disability, any of those can also be considered illegal harassment. Now, what that brings on us is just a couple of basic things, which is if we're aware of it, we should report it. And the city has then an obligation to investigate it and take some remedial action, determine, has this occurred? What are we going to do about it, and try and prevent it? Because again, the law's obligation on us is not just dealing with the person involved, but your obligation to have a workplace that is free to the extent possible of discrimination or harassment on those categories. Now, sometimes we have allegations of harassment. There's some buzzwords that we hear a lot these days, toxic environment, hostile environment, harassment in a general sense when it's not tied to one of the protected classes, age, race, creed, color, whatever. That that kind of conduct, in most instances, unless it really gets to the point of, physical issue or something, is not what we would call sort of general or garden variety harassment, is not illegal per se, but obviously as an employer, you want to have a good work environment, so you still want to address those, but they would not necessarily trigger your non-discrimination policies and your investigation policies, because those are rooted in the protected class. And in some cases, even if the allegation is related to a protected class, say someone alleges, sexual jokes with sexual connotations are being told by somebody, that may not necessarily rise to the level of sexual harassment as defined in the law, because it isn't severe or pervasive enough. One off-color joke in and of itself is not usually going to rise to that level. But the key there is, if you don't address it at the lowest level, eventually it can get up to a level where it triggers the legal liability. And so that's why, even if it's not yet at the legal level of harassment, which has its own definitions, as I mentioned, severe, pervasive, we want to address it and try to, have a conversation with the person involved, saying, that's just not appropriate in the workplace, and we don't tolerate that. Doesn't mean that the person instantly has to be terminated or something like that, but it does mean you want to address it, because if you ignore it, it can build up to a point, and it becomes viewed as maybe you're tolerating it, and you don't want to end up with a more serious situation down the road. But it's a very active area that we see a lot of complaints, a lot of issues raised, and it requires monitoring and looking into them, and then determining what's the best response to remedy the situation or improve the situation to the extent possible. Also, keep in mind that there can be a separate claim for retaliation. If someone makes a complaint in good faith, even if it turns out not to be actionable, not to be validated, or not rise to the level of harassment or discrimination, if they are then treated unfairly or differently, if there's some adverse, the supervisor is upset and starts giving them the cold shoulder and not giving them the assignments they used to give them because they had filed a complaint, something like that. Retaliation can be a separate complaint that then has to be reviewed and dealt with on its own, even if the original complaint didn't lead to anything. And witnesses are also protected. People that would cooperate with the investigation also have protection from retaliation. So it's important responsibilities, and you may have situations come up where you may wonder, well, why is the city looking into this? Why are we doing this investigation? And those are the reasons why. Generally speaking, you're not going to be personally involved in doing the investigations, that kind of thing, but being conscious of what the responsibility of the city is important for those in your role, so you know that the city is fulfilling its obligations in those situations.
Who do you go see to get this complaint taken care of then?
Well, it generally
Through the city attorney?
It probably goes to the city attorney and human resources side.
Okay.
Yeah,
And they do the investigation.
And sometimes they'll do it in-house, and sometimes they'll do it with outside counsel.
Right.
Yeah,
Great.
right.
Good.
It varies with the the complexity of the complaint.
There's a form and everything.
And who
the
is it?
employee.
Yeah, who is the person involved, right? Any other questions on that part of the topic? Okay, well then, why don't we shift over to the meetings, obligations, and walking quorum. Of course, the law starts out with a presumption of openness, that the Wisconsin has had a long tradition of open government, and the obligation is, the expectation is that all of your meetings are going to be open to the public unless specific exemptions apply. And so that's why when you know, on your agenda, when you have a closed session, there's a specific citation to it that lays out the portion of the statute that applies as the exemption, and then some general description of what is being discussed. The Attorney General more and more has been emphasizing that there needs to be a certain level of specificity that gives the public the knowledge of what the topic is, or what it's going to. And the more controversial in the open session agenda, the more controversial the topic might be, and the more interest the public is likely to have in it, it needs to be specific enough to let people know that this is what we're talking about. So the idea is they don't want you drafting the agenda in a way that has such general terms that nobody really knows exactly what business you're going to be taking up. And your agendas provide that specificity and take care of those things. But again, there has to be a specific reason if you're going into closed session. You can't just say, well, something might come up, we want to go into closed session. The public notice is required at least 24 hours in advance of the meeting to have the public notice of the meeting handled, how you distribute it. And there's a very limited exception in the law that allows a 2-hour notice, but that is a very narrow exception, and it really has to be an emergency type situation where there's something dire that's going to happen to the city if the matter isn't handled. I've been doing this for 44 years, and I think maybe I've had 2 true emergency situations that you could justify the 2-hour notice. You have to give the time, date, place, and subject matter of the meeting. As I mentioned, the subject matter must be reasonably specific, is the term that the case law uses and the Attorney General uses to advise what the agenda topics. So the notices, generally, it's interesting that agenda isn't actually referenced in the law. They talk about the notice, and what has evolved over the years is everybody, of course, they use the agenda to be the notice, and that works out fine, because that's where you're listing your topics and so forth, and so people know what's going to be covered here today by looking at this agenda and seeing the various categories of what's going to be discussed. And as I said, if you do have closed session, it has to be separately identified as what portion of the statute you're going to close the doors on. Now, walking quorum is defined by the Attorney General. I quoted the definition from the Attorney General's compliance material. There are a series of gathering among separate groups of members of a governmental body, each less than quorum size, who agree tacitly or explicitly to act uniformly in sufficient number to reach a quorum. So what that involves is, if it's called walking, because you may talk to one, then the next, And so it doesn't necessarily have to be everybody getting together at the same time, but it can be if you're, soliciting multiple people to take the action, to take a particular action, and work with it. The walking quorum topic has been coming up more and more in recent years because of the electronic communication and the fact that emailing and texting between enough members to constitute a quorum, that would be similar to a live discussion if you were in the same room, can constitute a walking quorum or an illegal meeting because you haven't noticed it. Can you meet electronically? Sure. You can have people participate in the meeting electronically. That's not against the law if you wish to do that. But everybody has to be able to see and hear what is being said by that person. So, but outside the meeting, if you're emailing a group or texting between enough members, that it's, again, substituting for a live discussion that should be happening in the public meeting, that could be a violation. And there's a quote again from the Attorney General that says, electronic mail creates the risk that it be used to carry on private debate and discussion that belong at public meetings subject to public scrutiny. And so the AG's office strongly discourages from using electronic mail to communicate about issues within the body's realm of authority. Now, obviously, you get information electronically, and there's no problem with that. The clerk's office sends out material to all of you electronically. That's fine. The problem can be if you start replying all about that material, and then there is a dialogue that starts going on that's substantive. That can then be implicating the potential for walking quorum. There also can be a negative quorum under the walking quorum concept, where if a supermajority is needed for some particular action, and there's a meeting or discussion between enough to be the negative quorum needed to defeat the supermajority action, that can constitute a walking quorum, even though it's not actually a quorum. It's what's viewed as a negative quorum because there's enough votes there to defeat the item, and if they're collaborating, that can be viewed as illegal meeting as well. Any question on that area?
What is the consequence?
Well, there can be the action can be viewed as void, and it can be a violation of the meeting law, which you can be there can be a fine and a complaint brought under the complaint and fine provisions of the meeting law. And that would be a personal obligation. The city could not cover that fine for you.
Bob? Over here.
Oh.
Sorry. Can you maybe just elaborate on who is able to attend closed sessions, or who is excluded from closed sessions, or what circumstances? Or
Sure. Generally speaking, closed sessions can be. It's up to the body that is legitimately convened in closed session to decide who can attend that closed session, except all of the members of the body have the right to be there. You cannot, if the city council is going into closed session, you can't exclude a member of the city council from the closed session, an alderperson. But if you want to have the police chief in, you want to have the city attorney, you want to have particular individuals that are advising or providing information to you in that closed session, you as the body can choose to do that. And then you can also excuse them whenever you wish to. So really the body controls the closed session. Also, I didn't mention it in the public meeting part of it, but anyone can record your public meetings. The statute allows any member of the public who comes in and wants to record can do it, or the media, obviously. The only thing they can't do is do it in a disruptive way. They can't, be going right up to you with a camera and interfering with your ability to participate in the meeting, or, go right in the middle of you in a way that's disruptive. But people do have the right to do that. And these days now with these gadgets, there's a lot more of that that's done.
Years ago, there was a ruling from Attorney General Van Hollen regarding Winnebago County. As typical county boards, it was all elderly people, and they had nothing to do, so they would show up meeting after meeting after meeting, and in Lake County, you used to get paid for that. And what they were doing is they were creating quorums of so many other committees. The Attorney General said, if you don't have an interest in that meeting or that body, you shouldn't be there. So I'm on health and safety. He's not, unless he has an interest, maybe he shouldn't be there because he creates this other quorum is involved in discussion. Do you know where that sits at?
Yeah, that's been a controversial issue for a while, and I don't know that there really has been a good answer to that. There's been, and now I think on a lot of agendas there's, like committee agendas, that there'll be sometimes a disclaimer that says there may be a quorum of the city council here, and they will not be taking any action or something like that. I think that can help, but it's sort of an unsettled issue to some extent, and not any real clear guidance on it.
I mean, if the member is sitting in the audience and doesn't participate as being spectators that are allowed to be, I don't see an issue, but there are times when there is back and forth.
Right.
And now we're creating a quorum of this committee or that committee, so.
Yeah, I think that the best thing I think you can do is just identify the potential for that on the agenda if you can. It's probably one way to address it.
Bob, if I might, back over here.
Sure.
Cheap seats. Upcoming, the council has been invited by the fire department to a breakfast at the fire station. And in there, I put an RSVP to know not only for planning of the meal and having enough food, but also the potential then of having that walking forum there. If we get enough, then it's a simple matter of posting it then as an open meeting, so the public would be aware that they're going to be there.
Is it strictly just a social type event?
Yep.
It's an open house? There is an exception in the law for social gatherings, so you're probably okay. Never hurts to be extra cautious, but it really, I don't think in that situation, there's not going to be any business and there's no intent of doing any business. It just might be that there'll be 5 there or whatever. I think you're okay.
Okay. I hope you guys can make it.
But if you have the area where this is being held is not normally accessible to the public, and and I'm not saying Josh, the Park and Rec could do the same thing next week, and he says, hey, I just want to let you know next year going forward, we really want to do this or do that.
Well,
I think then we're creating.
you could start getting into city business at that
Absolutely.
point. Right. So, you have to be careful. It has to really be a social, nothing more than a social gathering.
Bob, I do have another question that you kind of alluded to with anyone can record our meetings or whatever. Do you have any suggestions or any guidance as far as responsibilities are for the alderman to keep in mind if, say an example, a reporter came in and wanted your comment on some particular issue that might be a little bit of a hot issue in your community or whatever?
Yeah, I think the guiding principles there are probably to remember that when you're not acting as the body or only speaking for yourself, and making that clear to the to the reporter. Obviously, you don't want to violate any of the confidences of the closed session if that was involved with it. And it's also true in the social media world, where you want to be clear that you're not communicating in your role as an alderperson, but it's personal communication. But even then, there's been some cases around the country where websites or Facebook pages and things like that of government officials have been viewed as limited public forums, because and then the public official gets into trouble if they try to block some people off of that. So this is becoming a complex area, and it's something to be cautious on. Absolutely. Anything else? The last item on the agenda was just sort of cell phone use during meetings. Obviously, a lot of that is just sort of basic etiquette of you want to be paying attention to what's going on in the meeting, but it can even get to be a deeper issue because again, if there've been a couple of situations around the state where members of a body have been communicating with each other during the meeting about the topic, and that would violate the meeting law because it's not open discussion that the public was able to witness on the business. They weren't in closed session, and the public is entitled to know what the members of the body are communicating about a given topic. And there's also then that can trigger if someone believes or suspects that something's going on, they might make a public records request for your call log or content to see what was being discussed during the meeting. Some of those things come up, so just best to avoid the phone use during the meeting when possible.
May I say something about that? Everybody needs to remember that we are being recorded. All these meetings are being recorded, video and audio. And so I've had complaints from public that have been sitting out there or watched the meetings and see people doing this. And they've complained to me that it just looks bad. So just be aware, we're all being recorded when we're in any meeting. So that's all I have about cell phones.
It's a good point. Sometimes the optics we just have to be conscious of the optics of some, even if it's totally innocent and not any kind of meeting business going on. It can just not look right. Any other questions, comments before I surrender the podium?
Bob, could you touch on one thing that you kind of went over, but it more talks to the authority of alder persons as far as outside of this room. They have the right to talk to their constituents, but they really don't have the authority to tell them that something will happen. Say it's your sidewalk will get fixed next week, or talking with city employees as far as negotiations or anything outside of a meeting. They don't have the authority to lead on that something's going to happen. I mean, could you touch on that?
Sure. Yeah, that's a valid point, and it fits within that issue of the power and authority that each of you have is your vote on the council, and so you don't want to be making promises you can't necessarily keep. I think the approach you can take in those situations is that you'll look into it, or it's something you'll bring up, but you can only promise some follow-up. You can't promise the action or the decision or assume what the council's going to do about the given topic. So it's important not to represent that you will make this happen, because you don't have that authority as an individual. And you can say you bring it up to the council, but you can't promise what the council's going to do. Does that make sense? Anything else?
Can you maybe touch on the differences between the committees and commissions? I know it's farther down on the agenda, but just kind of give a brief overview of that.
I mean, committees are generally are subordinate to the larger body, where a commission, even though they may be appointed by the council, have some independent obligations and authority that is not, they will not, a commission is generally not going to be submitting recommended action to the council. They will take their action as that commission, where a committee will make a recommendation to the council for action. That's kind of the distinction that comes to mind for me.
So basically, a commission is a body on themselves,
Right.
where a committee is a subcommittee of this that makes.
Right.
Because I mean that gets a little tricky. Sometimes we have different commissions, and then it gets confusing to the older people because we're not involved in that, because there's not an alderman on that committee.
Right.
So, but it's tough to take sometimes, but that's the way it is. A commission is a separate
Right.
body that has full jurisdiction over there. We do have, the council has jurisdiction over the budget per se, but any projects or anything like that that's approved by a commission moves forward.
Right. Yep.
So I guess I just want to make that clear, because that got brought up the other night again.
Who forms commissions?
Who forms
Or
them?
who decides that a commission can exist or not exist?
I think it's by ordinance, isn't it, or by state statute? A lot of, like, Park and Rec has a commission.
It's a combination of both, yeah.
Right.
Statutes and ordinances that would set it up. Right. Well, thanks for your attention and good questions and dialogue, and I'll turn over the agenda.
Okay.
And wish you all well.
Thanks, Bob. Appreciate your input. Yeah, we'll take a 5-minute break. Unless you want to start.
Do you want to stand, or is it okay if
I told her she could sit if you want to. It's up to you.
I felt like I was very far away.
Okay. However you want to do it.
Okay.
Up close and personal.
Well, I wanted to feel like a conversation, and please interrupt me if you have questions. I want to stop and talk about what you guys want to talk about and what you want to learn about. So, well, I can get started. Rod knows about government accounting. And I'm going to keep this really high level. You know, we're just going to start introducing these topics, and then if you have questions, we can go deeper. We can have another meeting if we want to do a presentation on something specific. But like I said, please ask questions. Please stop me whenever you have something you want to learn more about. So at the beginning, I started out with just a little bit of an overview about government accounting, and I just wanted to very quickly highlight right off the top about how government is a little bit different from other private businesses, and how our reports and things look a little bit different. Because if you have an accounting background and you're looking at our budget or our monthly reports, you're thinking, what is this? And that's really because government does fund accounting. And so we have these different pots of money that are for different things. And each one has its own budget and its own purpose. And that's different from how you would run a business. The fund accounting is different. If you have an accounting background and you've seen our monthly reports, you're probably used to seeing profit statements, profit loss statements. And we don't do those in government accounting, mostly because the activities of government don't generate much profits. When you think about police service, fire service, road maintenance, those are not money-making enterprises. So if you were to look at a profit loss statement, it wouldn't tell you anything about the health of the organization or things like that. So we do revenue and expense statements compared to budget. That's how we sort of monitor the health of the organization and how things are going, is how we are on track with our budget. So I get a lot of questions about the city's different funds. And so in the packet on page 4, I put a list of all of our different funds and what their purposes are and what they can spend money on. So that's just sort of a comprehensive list of the different funds. We have over 24. And that's just sort of for your information, for your reference. Another question that I get a lot on is about what happens to money at the end of the year, unspent money at the end of the year. And so I wanted to draw a distinction between lapsing and non-lapsing funds. So lapsing funds are funds that come from the general tax dollars. And at the end of the year, unspent money lapses back into the general fund. It goes back into the general fund pot to be rebudgeted or reallocated. If it's money for a specific purpose, like a grant or a donation for a specific fund, like activity or program, that's not a lapsing fund. That would go into a segregated fund, and those monies would stay there for future use. So that's the big distinction, is about if it's tax funded, it sort of rolls back into the general tax pot and is reallocated the next year. If it's for a segregated purpose, a specific purpose, it stays in its separate pot and it's there for future use. Any questions on that? I do have it noted on the last column of the chart if it's a lapsing fund or not.
And then too, if it's borrowed funds, we don't borrow until the project, until the end of the year. So if the project doesn't happen, we don't borrow that amount.
That is just, and that's just Merrill policy. That's not
Right.
state statute or
Right,
anything.
But I was just saying, for us, in general, we,
I think there's an exception to that this year. We're going to be borrowing in end of May, beginning of June.
Yes. And we didn't borrow last year, so it makes sense to borrow once and only pay for those fees once instead of doing two separate borrowings.
And we do have a project that will happen later in '24 or early '25, and we may set it up where we won't borrow until that project begins. Am I correct? I mean, that's kind of what we were talking about.
Yeah.
So it may be two separate draws on it as far as if we have something that's going to be later.
Is that 10th Street?
Spruce Street. Sorry.
Spruce Street.
So Emily, I
Yeah.
do have a question. I know we have all these fund numbers, 10, 20, 21, 25, and our 26 are all our non-lapsing funds. How many of those 26 funds are not being used, like, at all?
I would say several are not active right now, that they have been used in the past, so there's history there, so we can't delete them. They're forever going to be a part of the city records, and they're going to show up on reports, but they might not have any activity in them. I'm thinking, let me look at the list here. Off the top of my head, right now, the MEC Transportation, MEC Meal Program, I haven't seen any activity in those funds. I think the disc golf one is one, it might have been active in the past, but I haven't been here that long, so I just haven't seen any activity there. So there's several of these that are not currently active, but they might have a fund balance and they might have been used in the past. I might be saving up for future use too.
And it might be something that we would use in the future if we
Yeah.
can. Okay.
Yep.
Just wanted to make that clarified.
Thank you.
so there's monies sitting in some of these accounts, just not enough to do anything or to move forward.
Or the committee hasn't taken any action to suggest any activities yet, yeah. Okay, any other questions? Great, so like I said, I'm just going to keep this real high level. We'll just move on to budget then, unless anyone has anything else they want to talk about. I love budgeting. I think budgeting is probably the most important thing that we do as city government. I think where you spend your money is what you're saying, these are our priorities, this is what we're doing, we're going to spend our money on this. So I think the budget is one of the biggest responsibilities that the council has. I provided a little bit of information in the packet that was part of the meeting, and then I had a handout that I gave on your tables. And this is just a snippet of the existing budget for transit. And I just grabbed this one because it's pretty simple, but there's a little bit of everything going on in there. So I just wanted to walk through it. So when you get the budget in front of you, we all know what we're looking at and how to read it. So I'm going to start from the top left. It says the fund, Fund 10, we're in the general fund. Right below that has the department, so we're in the transit department. Is everybody with me? Okay. You know, and in a budget that's 100 pages long and you're scrolling through, how do you quickly know what you're looking at? You look at this top left corner right here. You're in the general fund, you're in the transit department. So that's a nice way to orient yourself. We've got the approved budget on the top, telling you that that's the adopted budget. And then the column headers going from left to right. If you have a couple years of actual expenses for the past couple years. This one? Mm-hmm. Okay. And then we've got the 2023 current budget, year-to-date actual, projected year-end. So this is just helping us make our decisions about what we're doing last year to help us make, you know, decisions for the future year. So then in the very far right column is the proposed budget. This was actually the adopted budget. The header just wasn't updated. And so that column right there tells you what the adopted budget is for 2024. For transit, we've got revenues. We've got a couple different kinds of revenues. They have federal grants. They have state grants. They have some charges that they charge. They make some revenue from fares, so that's separate. And then they have some miscellaneous revenues. They make a small amount of money on interest earnings. So we budget by line, so each of those lines is a separate item, and then we roll those up into categories. So the category is miscellaneous revenue. It might include several different accounts, but we roll those up into miscellaneous revenues for the monthly reports, and I'll show that in just a second. Under expenditures, we have personnel services, and that's all of the wages, insurances, some of the deductions that we pay for employee service, for employee personnel costs. On the next page, we've got contractual services, supplies and expenses, fixed charges, and technology, and all of those different lines. We budget individually, but we report on at category level. We roll those up. And I have the highlighted, what you're going to see on the reports, sort of the category total. At the bottom of this budget, you see total expenditures, and I've got that circled there. $582,486. That's the total expenses of the adopted budget for transit. And then below that, it says revenue over under expenditures. And right, you can see that that's a negative number. It's $116,000. So that essentially is what it costs the city to run the transit department. That's what the revenue from tax revenues goes to transit department to pay for the transit program. So that's super high level, super introductory, but that's sort of how you read a budget. Are there any questions?
Any questions for the finance director?
Okay. When we provide our monthly reports to you, we do a summary report, and that is actually on the next page of the handout. I highlighted the transit report, and those highlighted areas, those are the category totals. So that's what we roll up all those individual account lines and we subtotal those, and that's what we provide in the monthly reports. And so you've got your first column, you've got your budget, the adopted budget. You've got the current period, that's the month we're talking about. You've got your year to date, so that's the, so far in the year what we've spent, and that's a percent of budget. So that's sort of quickly how you how the information is presented every month. And these reports admittedly don't tell us that much information. So if you're over budget on a category, you don't know exactly what's causing that overage. So that's, you know, would be a very appropriate question to ask in a meeting or to send me an email and say, let's dig into why are personnel expenses over? Why is, you know, what contract is sending us over so that we can keep an eye on our budget? So it's just sort of like highlighting for us areas that we should dig deeper into.
May I? Okay.
Please.
So then in a meeting, if a committee, if somebody sees that, like transit now, okay, as of March 31st, they use 24.94% of their budget. Okay. So in a meeting, if that number is, if it's not even, we're not even halfway through the year.
Yeah.
So this is pretty good because we're a quarter way through.
Yep.
They're using a quarter of their budget.
Yep.
So if by chance it would be March 31st and they already had 50% of their budget used up, that would be a question saying, why? What happened? What category? So that's an easy way, I guess, for everybody to kind of make sure that all the departments are kind of following what they estimated their budget, how much to be used in their budget.
And usually there's a very reasonable explanation. We think about this winter that we had, and our snow removal budget is going to look way different from other years. It's not going to make a lot of sense because we had very different weather that made the budget turn out differently. So, but having, digging into those issues are exactly what we should be doing in monthly reports and monitoring our budget.
Some of that is also the timing as far as when the money is coming in
Exactly.
versus when
Yes.
it's going out.
So if you have a large contract that you only pay and you pay it in March, you're going to be at 100% of your budget at March because you paid out that large contract. Cool.
Does any of this include where the money, it's just not tax dollars coming in? I mean, we have state, federal monies coming in. Is that explained anywhere?
Yes. Yeah, it's in the revenue section. So in the monthly report, the revenues are above. So I didn't print that page of the monthly report. I just did the expense part.
But if you refer back to this budget that she passed out,
Yeah.
on the top it says revenues, that's the money coming in. The expenditures are the money going out.
I get that.
No, I mean, but this explains what each revenue is, where it's coming from.
Okay.
Right, Emily?
Correct. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Okay, anything else? I'm going to move right along then into the good stuff, debt. Getting exciting now. So, I mean, for me, debt is a pretty complex issue, but there are really like 4 things I want you to take away from our discussion. Number 1 is there's like this legal issue. What are we allowed to borrow? What are we allowed to borrow for? There's state laws, there's Security Commission exchange rules, there's a lot of legal issues that we have to be in compliance with, so we can't just do whatever we want. We have to be within the law, following the rules, so there's some legal issues. The second thing is that there's like this, for lack of a better word, responsibility. Like just because we can borrow, should we? What level of indebtedness are we comfortable with as a community? And there's some policy questions there, like if we defer maintenance, projects tend to get more expensive over time. So if we don't borrow, what are we passing on to the next generation? So there's a lot of policy questions about just because we can borrow, should we borrow? And that's your job to tackle with those issues and to come to some understanding about what you want to borrow for. The next thing that I think is so important to highlight is that there's some strategy involved in borrowing, and Rod touched on this when he mentioned that we might, do different draws and different things like that, because there is some strategy. How is the borrowing going to affect our levy limits? What's going to happen to our tax rates? You have to think about the strategy about how are you going to structure your debt. And there are impacts on taxpayers, there are impacts on the future of the budget, so there are things we have to think about. And that's why our relationship with our financial advisors, with Ellers, is so important, because they are acting as our fiduciary. They act in our best interests. And what they do, 90% of what they do is borrow from municipalities, so they know. They've worked with large organizations, they worked with small municipalities, they work with growing municipalities that are kind of struggling. So they really are the experts in how we can use the different debt options that we have to best impact the village, or the city, excuse me. So that's just something that I think I wanted to highlight. Like, we really rely on our financial advisors to give us good advice on our debt.
And you have a good relationship with Ellers, you've worked with them in the past. So
Yeah, 10 years I worked with Ellers.
That's a very positive for the city right now, is that she has experience with the company that we use and has a good relationship with them moving forward. So I feel very confident moving forward with you in this position.
So I have a question to that.
Yeah.
So if we know we're going to borrow $1.5 million to pay off a street project, and that bill's going to come due probably in November, December, would we be better off borrowing it in February and collecting interest on the $1.5 million? Can we do that?
So yes, there is, there's a process to borrowing that you have to follow, and Ellers helps us set that up. You want your money in March, so you're going to have to start the process in January. You have to sort of back up from when you need the money. And then are you going to do short-term or long-term, because there are different rules about when you have to spend it versus when, if you're doing short-term, you have to spend it within the same calendar year. So there's some strategy involved, and you have to sort of think about that when you're figuring out what debt instrument you're going to use. And you need to know what you're doing before you do it.
I just, in the past, it feels like we're waking up the next morning and seeing the bar bill after we spent the whole year, and all of a sudden come November, December, we're borrowing all this money, you don't realize, wow, what we spent the year before. It just, I wasn't comfortable with it, both sides of this council.
Emily, just to touch on what you're asking, a lot of times if you borrow it ahead of time, your interest rate on what you're paying for the money is more than you would get in the bank. So you got to kind of do that math too as far as the interest on it.
And it's expensive to borrow. You have to pay your advisors, you have to pay your bond counsel. So, the more proactive you can be and roll those things into one, so you're only paying one bill instead of multiple bills for borrowing, there's some strategy there.
Emily, as a municipality though too, isn't there some strategy even on borrowing versus saving up? I mean, I think even personal accounts sometimes too, and being in different municipalities, the idea of thinking we're gonna save this money and then spend it for this isn't really maybe sometimes supported in kind of the process that plays out, correct, in the strategy. You're not really rewarded for doing that anymore.
Right, and project construction costs were wild the last couple of years. You don't know what your project's gonna cost in 4 years. You have no idea. You can do your estimates, but they really don't tell you, they're not good after 4 years.
Yeah, I mean, just picking on us in the fire department, if we were to save up and put money in a savings account and then 5 years from now try to buy the fire truck versus in 5 years, if we had to borrow and then pay it off, maybe a strategy, correct?
Right. I think in this world of levy limits that we have, it's very difficult for municipalities to save enough money. Our levy is growing by $40,000 a year. That's not even keeping up with inflation and personnel costs. So to think you can put, hundreds of $1,000s a year every side to help pay for a project is not really, in this environment, it's just not that realistic for most municipalities.
Historically, there used to be, say, a machinery replacement fund at the street department. There used to be funds where you would take so much, call it an hourly rate, that you have a machine running and you would put it into a fund. Over the years, those funds have been used to balance the budget. We're beyond that now, where it doesn't make sense for us to try to put money away and borrow money. It's kind of what you were talking about. So I think that's in the past, and we got to look forward on how do we pay back more than we're borrowing. I think that's kind of what we've focused on the last few years, rather than, if we're borrowing $3 million, we better be paying back $3.5 million, somewhere along those lines. But again, and I think Emily will get to it, our borrowing ability, I think you're going to talk about that as far as what the state allows. We're in pretty good shape as far as ability to borrow. Doesn't mean we have to, like you're saying.
Right, capacity, yeah. In the packet for the meeting, I did put a list of our current debt. We have 16 issuances outstanding. And the GEO debt is at 2.7% of our equalized value, and the state allows municipalities to borrow up to 5%. So we do have that little bit of additional, we have quite a bit of additional capacity. If we wanted to, we could legally borrow additional funds, up to 5%.
It's right around 15 million, I do believe.
Yeah. Did I put that in there?
You said that was as a percentage of assessed value? Or
It's your equalized value.
And will that change at all after the reevaluation of properties?
Yeah, it changes every year. Yep. And especially this year, there'll be a significant change.
How is the mill rate established?
The mill rate is the comprehensive, all of the different tax rates added together. So county, city, school, tech college, all of those together are your mill rate, those different tax rates. We could dig into this if you are curious about more. So we would take what our budget is.
I'm just looking at
Yeah.
the property taxes. No doubt they're going to go up. The evaluations go up. Now, like Wausau, I think was just talking, it doesn't mean that your taxes are going to go up, especially, but we'll have to look at the mill rate. So how are we taxing per $1,000?
So that's an excellent question. So right now we have, think of it as like a pie with all of the city's assessed values or equalized values. When we do the reassessment and revaluation, the pie's getting bigger because we're saying that $100,000 house is actually $125,000 or whatever. So the whole pie, I'm going to do a horrible job with this, the whole pie is getting bigger. So that doesn't mean necessarily that your slice, your share of the taxes is going to get any bigger. If the whole community is growing proportionally, your tax mill rate might stay, the mill rate might change, but you know what I mean? Like your tax burden might not change. It really is a lot of different, where if residential is growing like crazy, but commercial isn't, that's when that burden is going to shift a little bit. Does that make sense?
Okay.
I can dig more into this.
Well, when I come in and set a meeting with you and try to dig into this more, but.
Well, I think everybody might be interested, and we could just put something together. Yeah.
I think that's just something that we'll put together for our community.
Especially when we get our new values out, we can actually look at what we're talking about. Yeah, we could do that.
But that mill rate is approved by this council.
Yes, when you adopt your budget.
So you recommend it, or?
You're really looking at the amount that we're levying against the taxpayers. Say it's $8 million. That's what we're going to levy against the taxpayers. Next year it's $8,040,000. It went up $40,000. Well, equalized value, I think you were talking at $654 million.
Yeah, 674.
If the denominator gets larger as far as the equalized value, but our tax burden stays the same, say we're still at 8 million, the mill rate's going to be smaller, but the value of your home is going to be larger, so in the end of the day, you're going to end up paying the same amount. The area that probably will be affected are homes that were built maybe 5-6 years ago that weren't appraised at a real high rate when they were built, and now these newer homes have been, I should say, assessed. You're going to see those homes jump quite a bit. And even the $50,000, $60,000 homes, those will jump up to probably $100,000, $120,000. But the mill rate's going to go down. So at the end of the day, you're not collecting any more in taxes. It's just we have to get everybody up on this level playing field so they're paying according to how their properties are assessed.
Yep.
Good question.
Can I make a comment, Emily, when it comes to borrowing? I think just as a reminder, and even for the new alderman to be able to know what it is we had budgeted for, what we had approved to borrow, so that when you're going back and looking at it, you can say, this was a plan or a project that we approved for 2022 or 2023, whatever year it is we're borrowing it for. This is what we had agreed we would be willing to borrow, and this is what we paid. Now this is where we're going to borrow it, just as a overview for everybody to have that available when the time comes.
Yeah. And the time is coming, so great segue. We are going to start talking with Ellers this month, so you're going to get to see the borrowing process firsthand starting in a couple weeks. And we'll be providing, like LaDonna said, lists of what, here are the 2023 projects that were adopted in the budget. Here's what we're borrowing for. Here are the 2024. So you'll see exactly what we're borrowing for, but that's a very good point to keep that on the top of your mind.
Later on in the general agenda items too, we do have projects in the works that we'll be discussing soon.
Anything else we want to talk about? Want to get into? Okay. I'm actually going to slow down a little bit and actually want to walk through the tax increment district slides. Those are on page 10 of the packet.
The one that Ellers.
Yeah, so it's a combination of two presentations, but I liked it because I thought it was a really good introduction into what TID is and TIF is.
Probably on your iPad, Bob.
Yeah.
Oh, I thought it was part of the handle.
So tax increment financing, and I don't know what people's background is, so I'm just going to start very basic and just bear with me here. It's an economic development tool, is what it is. It allows us to take revenues from development and put them towards, from future development, put them towards current costs. So we can, borrow against future revenues. It allows us to do some economic development projects that might not happen unless the government puts some money into these projects. So TIF tax increment financing, that's the tool. TID, tax increment district, that's the geographic district that we're separating out, and we're saying this is the area we're going to focus our economic development on, and we're going to use TIF financing in this district. So we usually say TID when we're talking about our different tax increment districts. And so let's move on. Why would you use TID? It really is the most powerful economic development tool that municipalities have. In the world of levy limits, in the world of decreasing state aids, we just don't have the capacity to build up reserves, like Ron was saying. We don't have the capacity for doing significant investment in specific areas. We're focused on the whole village. You know, the city has to pay attention to all of our roads, all of our different things. The TID allows us to focus on one area and put some concentrated efforts into developing that area. Why would you use it? Again, it's just a tool that we can use. It's been around for 40 years in Wisconsin and has changed a lot in 40 years, and it's going to keep changing. You know, they keep tweaking the laws and making things different, but over time it has become, like I said, the most important economic development tool available to municipalities. So this presentation has this example. It is a 40-acre agricultural land. It's currently assessed at $500,000. I'm looking at page 11 on the presentation, if you want to follow along. The tax revenue on this hypothetical is $5,000, and that $5,000 is split between the municipality, the school district, the county, and the tech college. So in this example, it's $5,000 that's split. And when you agree to create a tax increment district, you're going to say, we're going to take this area and we're going to freeze that base level. We're going to take that $500,000 value and we're going to freeze it right there. And the county, the school, the tech, county, school, tech, who am I forgetting? City, thank you. We're going to agree collectively that we're going to freeze that right there, and we're going to continue to collect taxes on that $500,000 for the next 20 years. So during this life of the TID district, we're going to keep that assessed value as is. The point being that the TID then, as a separate entity, can do development, they can do things, and as the development grows, as people invest in this area because of what the tax increment district is doing, if they're building roads, if they're putting in infrastructure, the thought being that it's going to attract development, that people are going to come in and say, this is a site-ready spot, it's got water, it's got roads, it's got everything, I'm going to build here. And as opposed to a vacant land where it'd be a lot more work to get into that site. So during the life of the TID, the land is developed. This is on slide 7 now. We're saying there are buildings going up and that people are moving in. The assessed value grows to $10 million. So that $500,000, that base value that was agreed upon, is still being taxed. And that tax revenue on that base is still going to the county, school district, city, and NTC. But the additional increment, the taxes on that $9.5 million of growth, is going to the tax increment district. So like we're freezing this level. Anything above this is going back into the tax increment district. And the TID can use that to pay back loans. They can use that for project costs. They can use that for developer incentives if they want to. You have a project plan and this is what we're going to use the money for. But that increment is how the TID pays for its projects. It's by the county, the school, NTC, and agreeing that we're going to freeze this. We're going to continue to collect taxes on as is, but any growth is going to go back to the TID until the end of the TID. So slide 8 says that after the TID closes, that assessed value is at $10 million. That tax revenue on that $10 million is now shared with the municipality, the school, the county, and the tech college. In this example, it was a 1,900% increase. As a result of the development. The next slide, that's just a summary. And then slide 12 is just another way of looking at it. So I'm looking at this one right now. We've got that blue base value, that's the $500,000 in our example. And that revenues on that base value is shared between the county, school, tech, city. Then you've got development occurring over time, and that's the purple area. And the tax revenue on that additional assessed value goes back to the TID and allows the TID to pay for the project cost. And then you can see that the green areas, after the TID closes, that's the new assessed value for the whole area being shared with the county, city, school, tech college. I'm going to stop for just a second. How are we doing? Questions?
The original funding for a TID comes from where?
Typically borrowing, and the borrowing is promising the future tax revenues.
So we're borrowing for the life of the TID
Mhm.
until it expires
Yep.
at whatever godly interest rate.
Yeah. Yes.
It's not necessarily at the,
I'll
at the,
catch on to it.
no, it's not necessarily at the end of, say, like TID 3, at the end of the life of that everything balances out. That's how it's designed. Like with TID 3, that's actually a donor where it has more revenue than expenses, where it's able to, we're using it to, as a donor to some of the other TIDs that are underperforming, blighted areas that are helping those TIDs. So it's not always the point where it's designed to be zero at the end of the day. You know what I'm saying? That's the goal, is to make sure that everything, all the liabilities are paid for at the end of the 20 years. But in the case of 3 and 4, those have been donors, where we've collected more revenue than we've spent. And after, I think it's the last, 5 years that you can't spend any more money in that TID. The expenditure period is done. So that allows you to make sure that you have all your bills paid in that TID before it closes.
Yep.
And usually the interest rates are, very favorable from what we've had in the past. They've been as low as 2.5%, and I think they're probably a little higher now, obviously, but.
But all the loan money for these TIDs affects our mill rate for taxes.
No.
Everybody's paying for it.
No.
Okay.
That's a separate pot. That's, the general obligation is the tax levy. We just talked about the 17 million that we have in general obligation. We do have TID obligation also. The TIDs do not affect the tax rate unless we borrow from the general fund, which we did to start it out, like you were explaining. And we are paying the general fund back from the TIDs. So if you look at the undesignated fund, I think it was just $500,000 got paid back from the TIDs into the general side this last year. So the TIDs do not have a direct effect on the mill rate. That's a separate pot of money.
Is there some strategy that, I guess, I think about the fact that, we have the number of TIDs that we have for this size of community. And like you said, if TID 3 is done and we're borrowing from it as opposed to closing it, can we close them early? Is there a value to that? Is there a benefit to having fewer TIDs? I guess I'm thinking in terms of, okay, we have all these TIDs that are all at the present impacting what the school districts are able to get because they've agreed we only will take this much, but then they turn around and come to the community for referendums because it's not enough.
Yeah.
So how does that balance out, and where's a good, what's a good strategy for that as far as?
I don't want to jump too far ahead, but first thing is that donor TIDs are not loaning money, they're giving money. So if you have a struggling TID and you have one that's doing really well and they're in the same taxing jurisdiction as all of ours are, we only have one school district, we only have one tech college, we're helping those TIDs become successful. So they're not ever going to pay the TID back, they'll pay the general fund back. But donor TIDs are not paid back. When you close a tax increment district, you either close it at the end of its life, a termination, that's the end date. If you have paid all of your debts back and you have done all of your projects, you can close a TID early, and any fund balance that's in there's money left over, that is split proportionally to the different taxing jurisdictions. So the city would get some, county, tech, school, all of that would, if there's money left over, they're distributed to the taxing jurisdictions. If there are debts left over at the end of a tax increment district, those debts become the city's. We're liable for any borrowing expenses that haven't been repaid. And if you have a very unhealthy tax increment district, it's a real possibility that the city will have to incur some of those. We're not there yet, but I was in Cronenwinter about 10 years ago, and they had a very severely distressed tax increment district, and they had to start planning about how they were going to take on those debt payments, because there was no way that TID was going to recover in time.
Another strategy is to amend the TID boundaries where you can take out areas of that TID. Take, for example, the new Walmart. If we wanted to take that portion out to get that back on the general fund, we could do that. Right now, we do have obligations that match that with the TID sharing program that we've adopted. We're not able to do that yet, but that TID does close in 2026, I do believe. So we're not far away from that TID closing. But that is an option also.
Okay to move on? Let's talk a little bit about TID rules and creating a TID. So I'm on page 15 of the packet now. So when you're going to create a TID, you identify a specific area and specific projects that you want to do, and you take the parcels in that area and you calculate your base value. That's the assessed value. You add up all the values of all the parcels in that district. You make sure that you have capacity for the TID. The state law says that less than 12% of your equalized value is the maximum amount of TID you can have. And I think the last page of the handout, the paper handout, I have a list of our tax increment districts, and it shows that we are currently out of compliance with that requirement. Right now, about 17% of our equalized value is in our tax increment district, so we cannot, I think the term is tiffed out. We're tiffed out right now. So we can't create any new TIDs until we get that equalized value back into less than 12%. But you'll see our TID number 3 is going to close in 2025, and that's a significant portion of the value is in that tax increment district. So within a year, we will be back in compliance and have some TID capacity. If we wanted to, we could amend boundaries or create a new TID, but right now we're tiffed out. Okay, so once you identify your TID area, you calculate your base rate, you figure out what projects you're going to do, you make sure that you have the capacity for the TID, and you have to decide what kind of TID you're going to do, and that's on page 16. There are several different kinds: mixed use, industrial, blighted, conservation or rehabilitation, or environmental remediation. And the kind of TID that you create is subject to different rules. The city has 12 active TIDs. 5 of ours are mixed use, 6 are blighted, and 1 is industrial. That's TID 13 is industrial. And what is a blighted TID? That would just be one that has like excessive vacancies, that has older properties that are not well maintained, or has like declining property values. So there are some tests you can do to show that you actually have a blighted area. Okay. You also need to create a project plan for your tax increment district before you can create one. You need to identify specific projects that you're going to do, identify funding sources, how you're going to pay for them. Are you going to borrow? What are you going to do? How are you going to pay for those? And do a cash flow analysis, just showing hypothetically what it might look like to have all these different projects completed. Now, when you create a TID 20 years before the end of the TID, you really don't know. So the cash flows are updated annually. Every year you're looking at seeing how far you're on with development, where things are going. So you're updating your projections annually in your tax increment, your project plans. You can also amend your project plan. If after a couple of years you don't want to, this project doesn't make sense anymore, you can amend your project plan and add a different project. You can amend those project plans. On page 17, this is the but-for test. This really is the justification for creating a TID. You need to prove that without these special tax dollars, without this special tax financing tool, this development wouldn't occur. And so this is the justification, the but-for. But for the TID dollars, but for the TID help, development wouldn't occur. And here, that this is really trying to convince your joint review board, which is the governing body, agree with you that this is a good thing for the community, it's a good thing for the school and the county and the taxing jurisdiction, that after 20 years, the development that occurs, we've really like boosted the development in the area as a result of our tax increment dollars. So it is kind of subjective. You might have a right project for the right location. You might be consistent with local plans. You might have a project that's consistent with your community values. But without tax dollars, would it occur at all? Would the project move forward? Because sometimes great projects walk away. Would it occur on the time frame? It might take them phased development. It might take development 10 years to develop. Whereas if you can do some TIP assistance, it might cut that down to 2 or 3 years, and you could have a building done. Or at the same level with the same amenities. So, a developer might think, okay, we're going to not do as big of a building or whatever, at the same level of development. So there's a lot of arguments you can make for having those TID dollars available, and they don't need to be black and white. It's a little bit subjective. But for those dollars, development probably wouldn't occur at that level, at that time frame, and at that location.
So the developers are getting a benefit out of this because they're getting some type of incentive, or they're getting some assistance in the cost that they would otherwise incur to do this.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I guess the only thing that I would say is we hear a lot of times about we don't want to have affordable housing, or I'm trying to think of the word for it, where we're supplementing income for housing. And yet, in the reality of it, we're doing the same thing. We're incentivizing and we're supplementing these contractors and these developers. So I just as a statement, it's kind of two horses of a different color that, it's the same thing. It's just what kind of a twist do you want to put on that phrase as far as assisting someone, assisted housing, or low income assistance is we're assisting developers as well. So I think that's something to keep in mind, that it goes both ways.
Yeah, and hold on to that comment too. For a couple slides ahead, we're going to talk about 2 different models of funding developer projects.
With that being said, we have to look at our payback too, where it makes sense to the city that we will increase our tax base. We will be responsible to the TIDs where we can have future development, and not just subsidizing. And it's not so much the developer, but you talk about affordable housing, and it's, can they build affordable housing and still charge the rents that are deemed affordable? And that's a whole different ballgame.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Any questions on the but-for test? It is a little bit subjective, and municipalities spend a lot of time documenting, trying to make sure that they're being as objective as possible to validate this but-for test.
So the TIF monies is not just for new development. Current business owners or establishments can ask for TIF monies to improve a property?
Yes. It would have to fall in your project plan. It would have to be, new development. You can't have money for an existing project that wouldn't be an eligible project expense.
It's not used for general maintenance on somebody's current
Correct.
property.
Correct. If you look at page 18 on the bottom slide, they have eligible project costs. So you can do public work improvements, financing. There's a lot of things you can use TID money for in your project plan. There are some things you cannot, and that's on the next page. You can't use TID for building municipal buildings. You can't finance facilities that are paid for with user fees. You can't build yourself a new water treatment plant. That's a user fee. That's an example of that. You can't use general government expenses unrelated to the TID. I think maybe Chicago got in trouble one year because they used TID money for police equipment. And that's not directly tied to that tax increment district. That's not an eligible use for TID money. It's an operating expense for existing government. Okay, I'm just going to keep cruising through here. We talked a little bit about amending your project plan. You can, like Rod mentioned, you can change your boundary to sort of get yourself into compliance or add more property. There's strategic reasons to do that. It would be, you need to get within state law, you need to get in compliance, or there's a real opportunity. So you can amend your boundary 4 times. You can amend your project plan an unlimited amount of times. So you can say, we're going to add this project, we're not going to do this project. You can change what you're going to do with your tax increment district as many times as you want. It does have to go through the full joint review board, so they have to approve the changes. But you are allowed an unlimited number of changes. You can make a TID a donor TID, which we have done. So you say, this TID is doing extremely well. We have some other ones that aren't doing as well. We can donate some tax increment to those TIDs.
Emily, do you want to touch on what the Joint Review Board consists of? I know you mentioned it, but I don't think it was.
Oh, yeah. Thank you. It is a representative member from every taxing jurisdiction. So we have somebody from the county, the school, the tech college. We have a representative from the city, and we also have a public member. So those 5 people. And that's governed by state statutes. You have to have, your joint review has to consist of that.
And we will be having a joint review board meeting coming up.
Yeah, at the end of this month.
This year. So I did talk to the school district this morning.
Oh, great.
And he agreed to be on there, Shannon Murray. So we know the superintendent.
So it really is like the Joint Review Board is represented by all of the parties impacted by the tax increment district. So they have to support the project in order for a TID to be created or amended.
Your Honor, who is our representative?
For the city?
Yes.
Right now, it's me.
Okay. I just was out of curiosity, so everyone kind of...
I'm the chairman, I guess.
Yeah.
By default, mayor's the chairman. So.
Okay. I didn't know if that fell under LaDonna as council president or...
Okay, talking a little bit about the expenditure period. We had briefly mentioned this earlier. The expenditure period is the period of time which the TID can expend on projects. The expenditure period ends 5 years before the end of the district. And so you have that last 5 years, you're collecting your increment, and you can use that to pay back your debts. You can use that for any contracts that are ongoing, like maybe you're wrapping up projects. If you sign contracts, you can continue to pay those contracted expenses. There are some ongoing administrative expenses. Every year you have to have an audit. Every year you have to register your TID with the Department of Revenue. So there are some ongoing administrative expenses that you can continue to pay for. If you're a donor TID, you can continue to donate to other funds for that 5 years. And then at the end of after the 5 years, your end of your maximum life, or earlier if you decide to, is the termination of the TID. And you can do that by, reaching the end of the life. You can pass a resolution saying, we don't need this tax increment district anymore. We're going to close the district. So you can just do it by resolution, close them. And like I mentioned before, if there is a surplus, if there's a fund balance, that's split. Anything left over in the pot is split between the taxing jurisdictions proportionally. And if there are debts left over, those go to the city, or the obligation of the city.
Those aren't split between everybody?
They are not split, nope. Okay. Does anyone need a break? Are we doing okay?
So if the TID fails, that does fall on the taxpayer?
Yes.
It's on the property tax?
Yep.
Do we have any failing now?
No.
Emily, maybe just elaborate on the fact that, like, some of Rod's administrative fees or your fees, what you do for your, part of your salary actually comes from what you're doing in these TIDs.
Yes, thank you. That would count as an eligible administrative expense. So every month I'm looking at the TID expenses and balancing the TID books, and I'm doing a little bit of work just for those tax increment districts. So some of my time is charged to the TIDs. Same with Rod. He's doing all of the engineering for the projects. His time on those projects is charged to those projects, to the TID. So we're taking that, we're charging the TID for the work that is being done on the TID. Do you want to add to that?
No, the only thing I would like to add is at the end of, say, your 20-year or 27-year, if you want to extend it 1 year, I think you're allowed to do that, but it has to be used for, is it housing?
Mm-hmm.
And that's the question we have that increment, if you look at that wedge shape at the end of it, if it's, say it's $1 million and it gets broke down individually, the city at this point really needs that for the general side. So unless there's a project that is out there at the end of a TID life, we need that money to come back to the general fund for us to maintain our operations. Again, it's just, we've talked about it before. Right now, it's our recommendation that we do not extend TID 3 another year. We need that, the school needs that, the county needs that increment to come back into the general side.
Those extensions are very highly regulated, but one of the things you can do specifically on that affordable housing is that you can spend that money anywhere. So you take that increment for affordable housing, you can spend it anywhere in the district. It doesn't have to be in the geographical boundary of the project. That could just go towards anywhere in the city of Merrill. We could spend that on affordable housing. Again, if we decided to take that extension, which at this point they're not recommending.
Spend it how? Payments to contractors?
It would be, you would have a project plan. You'd have to decide what you're going to do with it.
If there was a,
Subsidize your contractor?
if there was a, say, a $10 million high-rise or development that was in the works and we wanted to donate $1 million towards that, that would be our contribution.
Gotcha.
That increment, that last year.
Thank you.
Okay, page 22. This is really,
Do you want to take a break, or you talked about taking a break? Is it,
I just wanted to
okay,
be sensitive to the members. This is
Okay.
heavy stuff.
yeah, we're good.
Okay, great. We're almost done. So page 22 is really, like, I want to spend some time here because there are two sort of models on how you can fund different projects in a tax-urban district. The first one is municipality funded. This is where the municipality borrows. They issue debt. They put in infrastructure or whatever it takes. And then by doing that, they're hoping that development's going to happen. So I worked in Cronewater about 10 years ago, and there was, just like our example, there was a 40-acre of undeveloped land that the city actually bought and became a landowner and subdivided, put in roads, put in utilities, and then they put in a huge amount of investment from borrowing and just sort of hoped that development would happen. And there was a lot of risk that the city took on, because this is not the most common method, but it worked for Cronewater. It was TID 2. They ended up putting in a bridge, which was a hugely expensive project, and really no one else you couldn't have had a developer do that. It was just like prohibitively expensive. But that bridge made that area a lot more accessible, and then we had already put in the roads and we put in the water, and so they just started selling parcels to developers, and developers are buying 10, 15 parcels at a time, and we were putting in these really strategically worded developer agreements. We're going to sell you these 10 parcels. You're going to build 10 homes in the next 3 years, and they're going to have a minimum assessed value of $250,000. So, like, we knew exactly how much value was coming in because we had those development agreements locked in. And then there was also, significant consequences. If the developer didn't meet the developer agreement, there was some repayment to the city, and we had spelled out in the developer agreement exactly what those repayments would be. So there was a lot of risk that the city took on because they put in that initial investment, they borrowed, but they totally, TID 2 exploded. I think they did, 40 houses one year, like 30 the next. I mean, and these were high value properties that were going in. And we had some assurity that they were going to be high value because we mandated that they had a minimum assessed value. So that's one way to do it, is sort of borrow up front. You put in all the investment, you take on the risk, and then you minimize that risk by these developer agreements. The other option is the second slide here, and that's pay as you go. And that is sort of, the developer funds the project up front. So they put in all the investment, they do their own building, and once they have that investment on the assessed values on the tax rolls and they're starting to pay taxes, we're using some of that increment to pay them back for this investment. So think of it like, actually there's a picture on the next page. It's slide 29 on page 23, next page. So the developer owns the business. That's step 1. They build their project, step 2. Number 3, that development starts generating increment. The city collects taxes on that increment, and then the city give some of them back, some of that increment back to the developers. So this is how the city of Wausau does most of their developer agreements. So every year, we'd get those tax bills, and I would pull out the tax bills for the developers that we had agreements with, and we'd make sure that they had paid their taxes and that they were meeting the restrictions on their developer agreements, and if they were, we would cut them a check for a portion of their tax payment that they made us. We were giving their tax dollars back to them as a reward for developing in our city, in our tax increment district.
This is what we've done with Nelson's Powerhouse, the Golden Harvest, out by the Mark. We've done that with Nicolay Premier as far as their incentive payments have been over a course of 3-4 years. It hasn't been all up front. So it does seem to work better that way as far as cash flow. We have something coming in rather than all going out in one chunk. So.
And it's a lot less risk to the city because if there's no development, then there's no incentive payments. So unless they're paying their taxes, they're not getting anything back. So it is an incentive, but it is actually their tax dollars we're giving back to them, if that makes sense.
So just a hypothetical question. Let's say we have a development with an agreement with someone to develop this pay-as-you-go model. They pay only part of their taxes. They wouldn't get any their incentive back, I'm assuming then?
It would be spelled out exactly in the developer agreement, but if that's the terms of the agreement, then yes, you wouldn't get your, unless you meet the terms of the agreement, like, and that's a certain minimum assessed value, whatever those terms are, then you wouldn't get your, no development, no incentive.
Okay.
But those agreements are important, and they're worded, and they're covering all the scenarios, so, yeah. Yep.
Emily, in your experience, how many developers have come in that weren't incentivized in whatever town or village or wherever you work for?
That were not incentivized?
Yeah. If it wasn't part of a tax incremental district, how many of those developers occurred?
Yeah, it's.
They don't, right?
Right, correct.
So that's the importance of it.
Yeah. So I did work for the village of Plover, and their Crossroad Commons is actually not in a tax increment district, and that is literally the only place where I have seen development happen where there wasn't like a rock solid agreement in place. And if you're a developer and you're looking at a couple of different sites, you know, where are you going to pick? The one that has an incentive for you, or one that you have to sort of take on all the risk yourself? So they're a powerful tool for municipalities to attract development.
And unfortunately, we're competing against other municipalities for certain businesses, so it has become a competitive area where, we've heard people say, well, Dorsey can afford to do this on their own, but they go exactly to what Emily just said. They go to where the municipality is going to help them develop. So it is a game that everybody's playing, and I know it doesn't sound good, but we have to play if we want people to come.
TIDs apply to manufacturing facilities also. I mean, it seems like we're focusing on retail a lot, but.
Yes.
Okay.
Weinbrenner is a TIF.
Oh, it is? Didn't know that.
Okay, I'll keep going unless there are more questions. This slide is on developer agreements, and we sort of talked about that. Those are really how the city minimizes the risk, and they're so important to make sure that they're clear, and we really demand, if you want a letter of credit, if you want performance bonds, you spell all that stuff out in the developer agreement, and if the developer doesn't meet the terms of that agreement, then those consequences, and sometimes it's repayment, sometimes it's, whatever the consequences are in the developer agreement. So when I was in Kronewater, we had a big developer that did not meet the terms of their developer agreement, and so there was a lawsuit filed, and there was, big things were happening, but we had that developer agreement, and it was basically signed in blood. I mean, it was very clear that it said, here are your responsibilities, here are the city of the village's responsibilities, and that really covered us. It helped us to minimize that risk. So I can't say enough how important the developer agreements are. Okay. So the next couple slides are just some common TID myths that we hear about, you see on the news, or different things, different arguments against the use of TID, and it's just sort of trying to clarify how TID actually works. So the myth is that TIF is enriching the wealthy developers using taxpayer money. And we kind of talked about this a little bit. if you're doing the pay-as-you-go method, it's their own money. It's not city money. We're not paying them. We're giving them a portion of their own tax dollars back as a reward for developing in our district. Please jump in if you have things you want to add.
No, that's one of those things where if we pay over the course of 4 years, after that 4 years is up, say it's $100,000 a year for 4 years, we're going to be collecting that tax base from now on. We're building tax base. And I know you have talked about manufacturing. I think it's all hands on deck, but right now it's been more on the residential side. We've been doing Webster Street, we've been doing out by the Mark, Superior. That's the area that we've had opportunity. We definitely, if somebody came in and wanted to build a 300 job facility and we were able to do it, we would be on board. But it's kind of opportunistic on how we do and what we do.
Rod, can you remind me, in the city's 5-year strategic plan, does that include any type of general direction for the RDA and you know, like we want to focus on this or we don't want to focus on that type of thing?
Again, I think it was the last strategic plan was we want to develop tax base to keep our mill rate down. With that, we're open to everything. If we had something come in that made sense, I think we'd entertain it. Not unfortunately, some of the items in that strategic plan also talk about amenities to attract people here. You know, employers need employees, and if we can't get people here to drive here is one thing, but to live here is something else, and some of the amenities cost money. So it's all in the strategic plan. As far as it's kind of circular, we need to pay for certain things, but we need to increase our tax base in order to pay for those. So, and even the police and fire and basic street and utilities, we need to increase the tax base because unfortunately the inflation and everything is going up and up. So we need to increase that tax base. That's what the TIDs have been trying to do, and right now it's more residential than commercial or manufacturing.
Okay, moving on. Next myth is that the developer does not need TIF assistance. Oh, I skipped one, sorry. Back to page 25. The TIF is stealing funds from the rest of the municipality. We know that we have that base value, and all of the different taxing jurisdictions have agreed that that's the base value, so they're not stealing. They're getting that continued tax revenue off of that base value for 25 years. So it's not stealing, it's sort of just separating it off, and it's an agreement that everyone decided that this is what we're going to do for the base. I didn't do a good job explaining that, but
It's locked, basically,
Yes.
it's locked in at that rate at that time.
and all of the taxing jurisdictions have agreed to those terms.
Correct. So anything that's collected over that goes into the TIF fund.
Exactly, thank you, yep, yep.
I don't mean to take away your thunder, I just
No.
thought it was, no.
Okay, I'm just going to keep going. Stop me if you have questions, please. Okay, myth, the developer does not need TIF assistance to complete the project. So this is where that but-for test really comes into play. But for this agreement, but for these incentives, that development wouldn't happen, wouldn't help, and that spot in that time frame or that level of amenities. And so it really comes down to just making sure that you're documenting, you know, like in the last, 10 years, we've had 3 projects walk away from this site. So you can show that there's something there, but that district needs something. It needs additional incentive to get someone to lock onto that site for their project or something like that. So it's just a matter of documenting those things and really evaluating the but-for, making sure that it's but-for that investment, the development wouldn't happen.
Emily, along those lines, when a developer is coming to us for TIF funding, that TIF funding that we can, offer them or say we're willing to offer them, that then goes into their cash flow model so that they can get the rest of the funding that they need from their other borrowing and whatever.
That's such a good point. That developer can take our agreement to their bank and say, look, I have this guaranteed revenue source. It makes it a better project for a bank to get on board with. It helps open up some doors for that developer too. It's a good point. Okay, myth, a TID is a bad deal for the other taxing jurisdictions. I think we've gone over this quite a bit, that at the end of the district, at the end of the life of the district, that's when the other taxing jurisdictions really realize the benefit of the tax increment districts, that they have agreed in the interim to this base value, and then once that value, once the TID terminates, that's when you get the full value back on the tax rolls, and that's the benefit to the taxing jurisdictions.
If they're still here. Let's just. we have
Oh,
a
you mean the
retail
developer?
Person in town that we gave TIF monies to, at the end of 5 years, we're not making it here, and they pack up and leave. Now,
Well, I think the argument to that would say that that development is there, that building is there, that infrastructure is there, that value is there. So whoever owns that parcel is still paying taxes on that parcel. So that value is, just because the developer changed hands doesn't mean that they are taking their building with them. That building is still there. That assessed value is still in your community.
yeah.
The one thing you may lose is the jobs. I mean, and we
Yeah.
look at that when we do a development agreement, how many jobs are created. I mean, that's a huge component of assistance is how many jobs are you creating? What's the increased value that you're putting into the property? I mean, we're looking for payback both as far as employees and increased assessed value.
Yeah. Well, you had mentioned that you had worked in Plover, and I noticed after so many years, many of the larger retail facilities closed their doors in Plover. And they've had to separate them up into smaller facilities. So I was just, if that was a TID down there, I was just wondering how they handled that. So.
When I was in Plover, they were working on, I can't think of what it's called, it's that potato growers museum that they put. Do you know what I'm talking about? Does anyone know what I'm talking about? It's right off of the highway.
Farm Expo.
Thank you. That's actually in a tax increment district, and that is a tax exempt entity. So they said, even though you're tax exempt, the value that you're bringing to that district through people, bodies coming into our area, people coming in, we might need hotel rooms, they're going to eat when they come. They decided that that was something that was worthwhile. So it really is like case by case, project by project, what is the benefit to the tax increment district and then to the community of that project. And you decide or not decide if you're going to do a project like that. But that was one that they actually did.
Do you have any tax exempt properties here?
A lot of them.
Yeah.
Every church, every.
Well, not nonprofits, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about in our.
Well, a
district.
hospital was tax exempt. There's a few medical facilities that are tax exempt.
I'm talking about in our TID districts, new development, that, hey, here's your agreement, we're going to give you, you bring your business here, we're going to make you tax exempt until this date.
Well, there are some building projects. Take, for example, the Park Place 2, the south side there. They pay a pilot, a payment in lieu of taxes. We're not taxing them. Just the housing authority is a non.
Yeah, it's a legal status.
Yeah.
They're by federal rule is tax exempt.
Jenny Towers. But to your point, if there is a vacant building, take for example the old Walmart building, there still are taxes being assessed to that on the property as if it were open. It's not like a dark store opportunity there where they are delinquent on their taxes, but they're still being charged taxes.
Gotcha.
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, myth. A TID uses municipal services without paying for them. This is one that, short answer. New developments in a TID pay for the impact on those through impact fees. And that would be if you had created that in your developer agreement that would govern if there are impact fees or not. And so I'm thinking like some places have storm sewer utilities and things like that, so you can charge them impact fees for hooking up to your existing utilities. But again, that would be governed by a developer agreement. Myth, setting up and administering a TID is cost prohibitive. Short answer, most costs of these natures are paid for by the developer. Again, this is when your developer agreement is so important. If you set it up so that you're transferring those costs, then the city has no burden.
And a developer agreement, you take care of that now, the finance director kind of
Yes, making sure that with legal assistance.
Yep.
And we also, every year, are reviewing those developer agreements and making sure that they're in compliance with them.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is our legal, is our attorney doing those? Or is that outsourced also?
It's done in-house.
It is, okay.
And I also rely on Ellers a lot for their expertise too when we're working on developer agreements.
Is it something we've done in the past?
Developer agreements?
No, like rely on maybe somebody else with more expertise to help with them, or were they just done by us and not like with Eller's assistance?
Oh, I don't know. You?
The development agreements have been done in-house with guidance from outside, I mean, as far as Ellers. But we've got it down pretty much to, like you had mentioned, what's allowable.
Mm-hmm.
Those changes have been made in our development agreements. Ellers does review the financial information to our projections to say, okay, after 17 years, when the TID is done, our increment is going to be this, and we're paying them this. Does it make sense? I mean, LaDonna, you've seen that on RDA, and I think the mayor has been involved with RDA. You've seen those statements, and we do run those through Ellers just to make sure we're on the right page.
I have a general question. I know we at one point had 14 TIDs, so that means we've closed 2 at some point. I guess I'm thinking in terms of these long 20-year paybacks, and you're saying, TID 3 is getting close to that. Have we had any prior where that long payback has come back to the community where they actually see that payoff per se?
The first 2 TIDs that closed were successful. We do have one that's...
Where were they at, Rod?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I think 5 or 6 we could close, and I think that's up for discussion as far as what we want to do with that one. But after 3 and 4 close, we're going to be down well below the 12%, say it's 8% or whatever, because those are our 2 biggest TIDs. So once we get down below that 12%, if we have an opportunity, I'm just throwing it out there, say somebody wanted to develop on the east side of Highway 64 between 64 and 17, and we were able to annex that and create a new TID to take care of development, that would be an opportunity at that time.
Great. Any questions?
Does that answer your question?
Mm-hmm. That's all I have.
We would like to follow up with some performance of what has happened in the past. Again, we had talked about, I call it Locomone subdivision. It's that area next to the Mark that has been developed, Webster Street, the trailer park, St. Paul area, St. Paul Superior, and one that isn't producing, which is out on Highway G, the industrial park area, and what our long-term goals are for those areas. We would like to follow up later on with either a cow or a RDA cow meeting to kind of go over those and see if the projections that were done in the past, where we're at with them, just so everybody is kind of comfortable moving forward.
There's an annual report that's due to the state every year on your TIDs. You have to report on how they're doing, and as a part of my work preparing that, I was going to make a larger presentation, and there's some things that I'm definitely still learning and relying on for Rod. The history of the different projects, what's happened, what did we say was going to happen, so it's going through all of that history, but trying to put together something that is a document that tells the story of each tax increment district separately, when it was created, what the goals were, where we are now, how does it compare to what we thought we were going to be. So that's something I'm working on, but I'm not there yet. Thank you very much for your attention and your questions.
Thanks, Emily.
Again, this was a base, high level. If we have more questions, I'm happy to dig into things deeperly.
We'll be having a follow-up committee type thing. I feel, especially with the reevaluation coming.
Yeah.
Of how to do that, so that's something that you and Lori can remind me to make sure we get that.
Great. Yeah. Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Good job.
Take a short break.
You guys want to take a break or you're on?
I have to go.
All right, everybody take their seats, we'll get this going again.
Yeah, it's business.
I don't believe it.
And we keep the insurance though by having an ISO rating of 2.
Just use the school's Wi-Fi that's here.
Or we can go up to 1.
Use the school's Wi-Fi that's here.
They say there's the Maps guest. It's just BJ's.
Don't leave me alone.
It's faster than the cellular.
I'll stay. I don't need to.
All right, we're going to start the meeting again. We'll move on to general agenda items, and we have meeting agenda guidelines. City Clerk Lori Anderson Mullen.
Okay, mine will be it won't be too bad. Just a reminder, everybody, that as of March 1st, we transitioned into Civic Clerk, and so that's a platform for agendas and minutes. And so if you want to receive any agendas or packets, you just need to go to the city website and subscribe to whichever ones you want to get, because we're no longer mailing anything out. If you need a hard copy or PDF, since your thing doesn't work, let me know, and I'll either email it to you or I can print it from the office. So just housekeeping that way. Civic Clerk is we also use it for our live streaming. So that is why I'm going to talk about the microphones. In order for everybody to hear what's on the live stream, like right now, you have to have your microphone on. And your microphone's on is if you have a little green light. Now, and to speak in order to be able to hear you on the live stream, you actually have to speak into your microphone. You can't be sitting back here and expect live stream to pick it up. You can't be sitting here and have it pick up. If you can hear yourself in here, you know that they're going to be able to hear you on live stream. So, and if you don't understand what I mean, please go back to April 9th. The Committee of the Whole is a perfect example of not being able to hear people. And there aren't a lot of people that have real loud voices. Like LaDonna, you and I, we don't have loud voices. So we may have to sit a little bit closer. If you have a louder voice, you can sit back a little bit. Like Kathy, she could sit back here and she wouldn't have a problem for anybody hearing. But if you don't have a real loud voice, you're gonna have to sit a little closer. And a microphone is just meant to project. It's not out here. It's very precise. Again, with the microphones, though, they are very sensitive. So if you're not speaking, you can always turn it off. But if you want to speak or something, just make sure you turn it back on, because it will pick up. If you're having a conversation with another member, they'll be able to hear it on live stream. If you're shuffling papers, if you sneeze, if you cough, that it's very, very loud when you're listening to the live stream. Trust me on that. So just kind of, and I know nobody likes to hear their voice. I understand that, but this is a world we live in. We have to have it live. We have to have it recorded. everybody has to be able to hear you.
It does help you take notes to down the road, so.
It does, because there are times when during a meeting, if I don't get what everybody's said because there's so much stuff going on, I rely on going back and listening to, watching the meeting, especially during budget time, to catch all the motions and to really catch what everybody says. And I don't really want to have to turn it up to 11. Nobody will get that unless you have a Spinal Tap reference. But I don't want to have to turn it up too loud if I'm sitting in my office and disrupt everybody. Now next it's agendas and like minutes or meeting guidelines. Robert's Rules of Order. We ordered all these little nice brief books. You can see I already have mine. I have little flags on mine. It's in brief. I actually read it. You can actually understand what they're saying in this one. The big one, that's like 500 pages, you might as well just forget about it unless you have a legal degree. So this one, it really explains everything very nicely. It explains the quorums. It explains how to do a motion. I have to admit that in this job, the most difficult thing is trying to write down your motions. So with motions, please be concise, please be clear. If you need to write down your motion before you make it, if it's really lengthy, you can do that and you can hand it to me. So then I have it written, I have it in front of me, so I know exactly how to put it in the minutes. What else?
Agendas.
The agendas. Since I was elected, I run a very tight ship with my agendas. With the agendas. I do not like to make revisions unless it's mission critical and it has to be done. So, if you need something added to the agenda, let the committee chair know. If it's a council agenda, let Rod know, let the mayor know. Let the person who's in charge of that committee, let them know if you'd like something on the agenda. And then they'll let me know. Otherwise, if you email me, I'll send it to them and say, is this okay? So with the agendas, I like to get them out a week before the meeting. So everybody has a chance to actually read what's in the packet and understand it. And then if you have any questions, you can go to the appropriate people to ask them questions. So like for Monday meetings, I like to have them out like the Wednesday before. Just because, like with Health and Safety, Board of Public Works, Personnel and Finance, they always have vouchers in there, and it takes a while to go through the vouchers and really, if you have questions, then you can kind of get it answered beforehand. So when I do the agendas, I do a draft agenda, I send the draft out to the chairs, and then they respond. If I don't get a response back within a day or two, I'm going to publish the agenda. If you don't respond back saying, yes, this is good, or no, change it, if it's to the deadline, I'm just going to publish it. And if it goes out with something that you might want changed on it, if you didn't get back to me, that's too bad. It's not going to be revised.
No soup for you.
Yes. And I should say, everybody is very good about it, but previously from what I heard, there were constant revisions, constant revisions. And it's hard for the public to know which one is the current one. It's confusing for committee members to know which one is the current one. So that's why if I have to do a revision, if there's something that if it's on a deadline or something that has to be on there, I'll revise it. But normally I don't like to revise things. But other than that, I think that was everything.
About following the agenda and not going off topic.
And I'm glad Bob brought that up, because it is so true. We could be in trouble with open meetings laws, because if it's not on the agenda, that means it wasn't publicly, we didn't publish it. And so we can't just talk about something that's off topic. And so, yes, I will sometimes, I'll be the agenda Nazi and have to remind people this is not on the agenda. So I'm not doing this to be a pain in everybody's butt. I'm doing it so we don't get in trouble for stuff like that.
And I bring that up only because I'm at almost every single committee, including ones that sometimes you cannot be at for whatever reasons, you know, whether it's the Enrichment Center, Park and Rec. I know there's a few others that I get to attend that you often do not.
Mm-hmm.
There are some of those committees that also go off topic quite often, actually, that should end up getting addressed. So I just wanted to.
Yeah, it's very important. That's why our agendas, we're really specific as to what we're going to talk about. That's why we don't put, new items. We just we don't put that, because then that could go, who knows what would happen with that one.
Or any other discussions that I've seen that on a few agendas where I'm going,
yeah.
Why?
Yeah. But for the most part, I think we do a really good job with sticking to the agendas and the topics that are on there. We can, and it's up to the chair how much they want to allow. So if it's part of the topic, then that's fine. But if it's way off, then it should be reined in. So. Anything else? So everybody make sure you have your green light on if you're going to be talking.
I'll use my outside voice for a while.
I know, but see, that's it, because LaDonna, you have a very soft voice, and so you have to, yeah. And all the microphones, they're set for the same sensitivity. Dustin makes sure that they're all set for the same sensitivity. They're all on, they're all working. We test them. These are brand new mics, and so if you speak into it, there isn't a problem hearing. And it's just for live stream. It isn't for in here. It's for the live stream.
I think there are a few spots in the chambers where it doesn't pick up quite as well. That can be addressed too later on.
Okay. All right, that's all I got.
All right, we covered number 2. Bob Burns covered that for us, the differences between committees and commissions. We'll move on to number 3, the chain of command organizational chart. Rod, did you want to add anything to that, or did you?
I guess if you guys want to take a look at the chart and kind of see if you have any questions on number of employees or who falls under whose chain of command, that's the structure we have in place right now. I'll be happy to answer any questions on the chart.
Is the library board, is that considered an equivalent to a library commission, per se? I mean, do they?
Kind of is. Because
they have a couple different committees. They have an endowment committee there, and so there is some. They're part of the county, but they also have a few subcommittees in their realm that aren't affiliated with the city.
But when you were talking earlier about, the difference between committees and commissions, that they kind of operate on their own, the library would kind of fall under that.
No, we have a member
or?
on the library board.
Okay.
I can answer something with the library, though. The library has a Friends of the Library Board. I'm on that. It's not affiliated with the city or anything, because a library can't, they can't make, or they don't get money, or they can't sell anything to receive revenue other than fines, but they eliminated that, the book fines. And so Friends of the Library boards are formed so we can generate revenue, and then it funnels back into the library for some of their programs. So the way the Friends of the Library boards operate is through book sales. So that It's completely different than the library board. We're a separate little subcommittee with the library.
Any other questions on the organizational chart? Anything to add, Brad?
No, it's changing, I wouldn't say monthly, but we try to keep it updated, and we don't really post that anywhere, but if you need an up-to-date copy at any time, just let myself know, or usually Jill has an updated copy, or even, I think Lori is starting to give you an updated copy and keep in your office.
Yep.
All right, we'll move on to projects in the works.
Just to touch on a few of the infrastructure projects, right now we are working on O'Day Street. Weather permitting, we should have the underground in by middle of next week. We are just replacing the water main on there, and then we will be building the base back up, pouring curb and gutter, and then paving. The additional project, which is sidewalk on the north side, waiting to hear back from one landowner yet. We are going to prepare the base for that. It will be bid out as soon as we get all landowners agreeing. If they don't all agree, then we have to have a hearing, which will push it off, but the base will be ready. We will bid that project out separately. I do anticipate it over $25,000, so we're looking to have that project done right around 1st of June, Memorial Day, somewhere in that window, again, weather permitting. 20th of May, we will begin the South Center Avenue resurfacing project, which is from Joe Snow to approximately Bergner Contract Carriers. That will be closed to through traffic. We will keep it open for local businesses through there. You got the greenhouse and the nursing home or not nursing home, the
Assisted living.
Yeah, there's an assisted living there.
So it will be open to the residents that live there, and it's just going to be we're going to mill it off and then repave it. We do have quite a bit of curb that we're replacing too, so it will take a little time. After that project, we do have North Sale Street from 6th Street to 12th Street that we are doing the same thing. We'll be milling that off and resurfacing that, again with spotted curb replacements. We do have both parking lots here that we will, in the back, that we plan on redoing this year, and then also the old Lincoln County Bank site next to the Mac home. We plan on expanding the parking lot there and then tearing up the existing parking lot on the south side of the alley and repaving that whole area. That was approved in the '24 budget. You had heard earlier as far as different strategy for borrowing. Spruce Street extension from 10th Street to 14th Street is in the works. REI Engineering is working with the developer to come up with a stormwater plan which will incorporate our extended roadway and all the sites that DNR requires as far as a stormwater plan and a plat development through that area. So we're hoping to have that finalized in the next probably 3 weeks here, where we can get that project bid out. We haven't done that yet because we've been waiting on a development agreement and some other things. Excuse me. And then we're looking at constructing that yet this fall, early spring. However, it gets done. We'll have a completion date of probably the 15th of June. And that's just going to be gravel and the utilities. We're going to wait probably at least 2 years to put curb and gutter and pave that. We want to see the development happen in that area before we invest more money in that project. So that's kind of where we're at with the major projects. We do have a couple others that we have talked about as far as Park and Rec, normal park expansion, a few lighting projects, a few machinery purchases that were included in the '24 budget. And I guess before we start on the '25 budget, it might be good for us to go over the '24 budget and just see where we're at with everything, just to make sure that Things have happened that we said would happen on the '24 budget. So I guess with that, I'll answer any questions. Not everybody at once.
I guess when would you anticipate having a meeting, like within the next month, to go over that?
It probably won't be until, I would say, closer to the third week of July before we really start with the budget process. We'd like to sit down with department heads, and that'll give us 6 months of the '24 budget to kind of make any adjustments to our operations. Capital-wise, it'd probably be in that same window, probably be middle to end of August, if we can have operations and capital kind of put together. The mayor and Emily and I have sat down and kind of talked about what the process is. We'd like to have the numbers as far as operations and capital ready for, again, end of August, somewhere in there. We won't know the numbers back from the state and some of the other shared revenue numbers until late October, but we at least want to tackle what we can tackle, and then almost project what we expect to come in over the last few years of how things have happened, be it insurance rates. I think last year we were very fortunate with a negative 3% increase. That's not going to happen again. So we can put some projections in there as far as shared revenue and state funding and where we're at. And then I think, Emily, you can speak to that, but we've talked about, highlighting certain things in yellow. These are variables that will change, but here's our projections. So we can say, okay, we need to cut a position. We can't fund this capital. We need to have some of those discussions well beforehand. And I think that's what you guys have asked in the past, that we get ahead of it, so it's not the last meeting where we're looking at each other like, okay, what cuts did we make, what cuts didn't we make? We should be prepared.
Correct. Okay, thank you.
Is that time frame kind of what we had?
Yep. Okay. Any questions? I just want to make some comments kind of along these, for the projects in the works. I want everybody to know that the city fireworks is going to be July 5th this year, not July 4th. We had a change of vendor this year, and they cannot do it on the 4th, so it will be the 5th. City administrator and I are going to be looking at strategic planning coming up for this year, probably. We need to update our strategic plan. It's been 5 years, I believe. And some of the members have noticed that I'm wearing City of Merrill shirt. If anybody wants to have shirts made, you can get me your shirts if you want, or we can go through the person that does it. She can order shirts, but if we have enough here, I had 5 shirts done. She charged $4 to put the logo on my shirt, per shirt. So if anybody wants to do that, please let me know, and I can take care of that, arrange that. That's all I have. But I don't want to exclude anybody from having the shirt logo if you want it done. Next item on the agenda is interest in city facilities tours. We did this, oh boy, I can't even remember how long ago that was, where I think Rich Grenfell was still here for the bus. He drove the bus, and we one night took a tour went to each facility. Is that something that this council wants to do?
I don't see a reason why we shouldn't want to.
You're not just driving to the facilities, you're actually going in and finding information out about them? Is that the idea?
Yep.
Okay.
Drive in, and like at that time, I know Rebecca already did this, but like we took a plant tour of the treatment plant.
It was super interesting. I really liked it.
I know at that time, fire station, we went on a tour of the station, fire station, police station, kind of too, just what they do, things like that. street department, city garage, water utility garage, things like that. So if that's something that you guys want to do, we can arrange.
Well, I want to step up and make Merrill better. I would love to see the community jump up and get more involved, get people excited about making Merrill better, whether it be through beautification or volunteer at different departments or whatever they could do. So, do we have a?
We don't have a coordinator per se. I
Yeah,
mean, if somebody
organizer.
if somebody comes to us with an idea, usually we try to direct it in the right. If it's park related, if it's street related, if it's an item that historical pres or whatever it's related to, we try to direct it to that appropriate committee. I guess if there isn't something that's covered by the appropriate committee, it should be something that is addressed with the mayor and myself, that we can either come up with a plan if it's warranted, or directed in the right direction. There's Rotary Club, the Optimist Club, some of these other places that are looking for opportunities also, that we've directed certain ideas to.
Yeah, I'm just looking for volunteers. I mean, I think they do a wonderful job. Hopefully that we're patting them on the back once a month, because they really do a nice job beautifying the downtown area here and the roundabout.
So I found out that roundabout group
Yep.
is actually a county organization.
Is it really?
Yeah, it doesn't go through the city at all.
Well, that's too bad. Okay. Well, it's not too bad. It's just okay.
And we do, on social media, we do thank them quite a bit.
Good.
And
I do it on the radio show too.
as far as the hanging baskets, they pay for a portion of it. As far as Park and Rec has a guy water, so it's kind of a combination deal.
That's a volunteer?
No, that's a paid position.
Oh, okay.
Again,
The watering is paid, the planters are not. But we put
Yeah.
we put the hanging baskets
Yeah, but
up.
couldn't a volunteer water them? I mean,
not
No.
responsibly.
No.
Like they want them. I mean,
They want them watered every day with.
whether it's raining or not.
Right.
I got you.
Any other questions or follow-ups? Hearing none, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
I'll second.
I have a motion and a second to adjourn. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
We are adjourned. Thank you.